Hi everybody!
During the early days of my channel, I made a video detailing the things I was hoping for out of Dead or Alive 7. Thankfully, the game is no longer a pipe dream. So here are the 10 things Dead or Alive 7 needs to be a successful game. Subscribe if you like video essays on fighting games, JRPGs, and PlayStation. This first one should almost go without saying. This is no longer a feature that's considered a luxury. It's one that all competently made fighting games must ship with in the 2020s. That being rollback netcode, which is way above my pay grade to explain, but if you're interested in learning more, a link explaining it on a technical level will be in the description. But the layman's version boils down to this. It makes fighting games perform better online, especially if you're playing someone on the other side of the world. Previous Dead or Alive games used something called delay-based netcode, which worked great if you were relatively close. But even a few time zones apart in the same country could face a ton of lag, making it less than ideal. Pre-2020, delay-based was acceptable, but still not great. The pandemic was the literal point of no return. Any fighting game that was rocking delay-based netcode pretty much died then and there, because player bases exploded and people realized just how dire the old way was. Basically, if Koei Tecmo wants Dead or Alive 7 to not be dead on arrival, it needs competent rollback netcode. Since it's a 3D fighter, they should hit up Bandai and see if they can learn a thing or two from how Tekken 8 implemented it. Anyways, moving on. This is another one of those thanks Captain Obvious things, but Dead or Alive 7 absolutely must ship from day one with crossplay enabled. During the 2010s, when this was more black box and locked down, it was understandable why developers wouldn't allow crossplay between the various consoles. It was scummy even back then, because you needed to have potentially multiple consoles and a PC copy of the game if you wanted to play with all of your friends on different platforms. Since fighting games got revitalized in the early part of this decade, this has become a non-factor, as developers finally allow people to do cross-play matches, albeit it hasn't been smooth sailing to get here, since a lot of games had to either come out with definitive editions at a later stage that enabled this, or the developers had to include it during a later patch. In the last few years, that has changed, and games have started to ship with crossplay right out of the box. But we all know some developers can be insanely behind the times, because they're set in their ways and refuse to change. I don't think this will be the case with Team Ninja for this new Dead or Alive game, but it's still worth mentioning for the worrywarts who will be negative about everything until we get confirmation. I know a lot of that worry is persistent because of how tight-lipped Team Ninja and Koei Tecmo have been with Dead or Alive 6 last round. This has caused players to speculate the game won't have rollback or crossplay. I imagine it will have rollback, but I am in no way expecting crossplay from DOA6 last round. But Dead or Alive 7 needs crossplay from day one, because it will not only help with matchmaking, but will also be far more consumer-friendly to the player base, as you could then make lobbies with friends regardless of their platform of choice. This next one is something the casual player base will demand and the hardcore crowd probably won't touch. But that's just something modern fighting games require. It's basically the expectation, like rollback netcode. If it's not there, players will riot, metaphorically speaking. Well, it might seem like it's pandering to the casuals at first, it's actually not. Let me explain. A metric shit ton of single-player content actually gives the game far more legs, and that's something even the sweatiest of sweat hogs who are perpetually online can benefit from. Older fighting games from the early 2000s were packed to the gills with single-player content, and this is something modern fighting games are relearning after almost a decade of being starved for solo content. But developers actually caring about the single-player experience again in recent years has been a good thing. The stories are now competently made, even if they're nothing to write home about, and games like Street Fighter 6 and Tekken 8 have found ways to utilize some of these modes as teaching tools for the newcomers. something that overall improves the experience, as new players can slowly acclimatize to this type of game before getting their shit kicked in online. This next one will also be related to solo content, kind of, but not really. You'll see in a second. We aren't going to spend a lot of time defending this next one because there really isn't a lot to say on the matter. This is again just a standardized feature that players, whether they be casual or veterans, just expect, and it's literally one of the best teaching tools in fighting game history. You can respectfully fight me in the comments section on this one. It's Ghost Battles. They're infinitely more useful than the training dummies, which you have to program in training mode to do what you want them to. These ghost battles literally take the fighting data of yourself or another player and has you fight against them in a solo mode, or in some cases it features a jump in mode, so you can try and not get fucked up in a situation where you previously got bloodied. It's such a great training tool because it allows you to react to how someone actually plays the game, and not a good enough approximation from the CPU in one of the many single player modes. Given how deep the gameplay is for Dead or Alive, this is probably one of the best features Team Ninja could include for players of any skill level. Anyways, moving on. Look, I'm not naive enough to believe Koei Tecmo aren't going to nickel and dime the players to hell and back with DLC. They are 100% going to do that. Hopefully, they learned from the sixth entry and won't make it to the point where it'd cost thousands just to buy everything. Because that is literally what they did with Dead or Alive 6, which is partially why the player base said fuck off. We will cover one of the other reasons the fandom gave the sixth game the middle finger later on. But one thing that would garner a lot of goodwill from FGC veterans would be unlockable costumes. Not only would that be a lovely hit of nostalgia, but it would also respect the player, because only the biggest idiots in the world are going to spend tons of money to play dress up with their favorite characters. It'd also be nice if Team Ninja let players mix and match costume pieces. However, I very much doubt they will do that, given it'd require a lot more programming, and that's more the wheelhouse of Tekken and Soul Calibur, even if it happens to be a nice feature. Remember when I said a moment ago we'd be covering another aspect of DOA6 that caused players to throw out the middle finger? Yeah, we're discussing that next. I know a lot of people find this part cringe, but it's what makes Dead or Alive, well, Dead or Alive. It'd be like telling a punk rocker to dye their hair a natural color, put on a suit, and get a corporate office job of the most soul-crushing variety. It just doesn't work. This is also the reason Dead or Alive 6 flopped harder than a fish out of water. It gave up the core identity of the franchise to chase the trend of esports. It was a different time back then, when fan service was so heavily frowned upon in video games that it was suspiciously clean, almost like the search history of a Catholic priest. But Dead or Alive kind of needs the tongue-in-cheek fan service. Just look at the history of the franchise. It's like a cheesy action flick from the 1980s. Take away those trappings, and it just becomes a rather humdrum experience that's quickly forgotten about. You want a more pure martial arts experience, then something like Virtua Fighter is your bag, which is funny when you consider the fact Dead or Alive was always paying homage to Virtua Fighter to some degree or another, even including some of that franchise's most iconic characters as guests in Dead or Alive 5, which lets us transition nicely to our next point. Guest characters can be very hit or miss in fighting games. Sometimes they are absolute bangers and they get the fan bases of both franchises hyped up. Other times, they land flatter than Marie Rose's chest. For Dead or Alive 6, the guest characters were met with mixed results. A lot of people were happy to see Mai Shiranui from Fatal Fury and the King of Fighters return, as she was also available for a time in Dead or Alive 5. Kula Diamond from the King of Fighters, on the other hand, was derided by fans thanks to her lacking sex appeal and absolutely bending the game over backwards with how badly she broke the balancing. Also, SNK wasn't in the best of places during this time period, so the inclusion of their characters was maybe a bit questionable. However, they have improved their stock considerably at this point in time. So, it'd actually work to see Dead or Alive return to the SNK well for a third time, and this is certainly something I'd love to see, considering I am 100% an SNK guy. Just look at some of my past videos, and you'll see why. But I have a few SNK characters I think would work pretty well if they decide to not include Mai for a third time. And let's be real, they will include her for a third time. But I would absolutely love to see Vanessa from The King of Fighters and B. Jenny from Fatal Fury and The King of Fighters, because both characters fit the fan servicey nature of Dead or Alive to a T, just in different ways. Vanessa fits the people who like MILFs, and Jenny fits the femme fatale archetype. Also, let's face it, some Dead or Alive fans would probably get off if she beat them senseless with her shoe. You thought we were done with characters and rosters? Nope, you'd be dead wrong. While DOA might be known for its big bazongas, it typically has shipped with a more concise roster size. That's not a bad thing, especially when you consider the games are made with moderate budgets, and the budget goes mostly towards the graphics and the gameplay. But a small roster just isn't going to cut it for DOA's hopefully triumphant return. I think somewhere in the mid-20s would be ideal for the base roster size. I'd say we can pretty much lock in Kasumi, Ayane, Murray Rose, Hanukkah, and Nico. That's because 4 of those characters are pretty much package deals. You need Murray Rose and Hanukkah, as those two are always paired up in storyline, and they've become fan favorites. And some would argue they're now Dead or Alive's pinup girls. Kasumi and Ayane are in an eternal rivalry, meaning they're a package deal as well. Nico, on the other hand, is a newcomer who can have significant story importance depending on how she's written. I'd rather have a Tomi as the 5th locked in, as she is my main and she's incredibly beginner friendly, but most people find her boring as fuck, though I do think she'll likely be a main roster inclusion, just not one of the first ones revealed, which is interesting when you consider she almost took over as the pinup girl at one stage. During the early 2000s, she started to take over that role in some of the marketing, especially with the Dead or Alive Extreme games. She's definitely my type, but that's beside the point. Dead or Alive 7 will require a decently sized roster, and DLC will have to increase the roster size beyond the mid-20s and ideally into the mid-40s. But let me know in the comments some characters you want included in the base roster and the first wave of DLC. If this video gets to 25 likes, I'll make it a priority to release a video predicting the roster for Dead or Alive 7. I already have a built the roster, which is basically what my idealized version would look like, so check that video out when you're done with this one. This next one is kind of related to the previous roster points, but not in the way you'd expect. Core Fighters has been an aspect of Dead or Alive since DOA7, and it has been wildly successful, as it offers a tiered model, and they're honoring this 2-tiered model with Dead or Alive 6 Last Round, which is out this summer. For those not in the know, the Core Fighters version of the Dead or Alive games is effectively a free-to-play version of the game, which gives you access to a set number of characters, limited access to the various modes, and allows you to play online. You can then upgrade to the full game or buy characters piecemeal if you only want to get specific ones. Core Fighters is actually a great idea for newcomers as it allows them to try the game literally risk-free, and if they find they love it, then great. They can buy the full package. But Core Fighters is a must from day one, because a lot of DOA veterans feel burned, and rightfully so, after DOA 6. A lot of newcomers will also probably be hesitant to jump on board right now, either because fighting games are something they're testing out, or they know of Dead or Alive from reputation alone, and might be tentatively interested, but still hesitant. This gives them a risk-free option. This next one is kind of back to no-brainer territory. While Dead or Alive has always been a nice balance of defensive and offensive gameplay, Dead or Alive 5 was a very aggressive game, and the player who took the initiative usually had the advantage, so long as they didn't try and overextend. If they did, they'd get punished very harshly. It was a great risk versus reward system. Dead or Alive 6, on the other hand, was pretty much the antithesis to this, as it was a slow, boring defensive slog, having more in common with Tekken 7 than Dead or Alive 5. I'm not saying Tekken 7 is a bad game. It's just a case of if I want to play Tekken 7, I'll fucking play Tekken 7, you know? At this stage, fighting games have moved into a more aggressive era, and that's something I greatly appreciate, because I like rushdown and in-your-face characters, so being rewarded for kicking my opponent's shit in, that just feels great to me. But Dead or Alive 7 has to be the anti-DOA6 at the end of the day, because people would complain, and rightfully so. If Dead or Alive 7 ends up being a lifeless corpse like 6, then I'd say it's light out for Dead or Alive as a fighting game franchise. I've got another video in the works which will discuss that in more depth. But what makes your wish list for Dead or Alive 7? Let me know in the comments. And since you've made it this far into the video, why not check out my video discussing why we need a Dead or Alive collection now more than ever, or the other video I alluded to previously in this one. But until next time, keep blazing that trail.